Are we missing anybody else? I don't think so. I think we're good. So as we outlined in our agenda, we were thinking it might be good for Kate, for you to walk us through the memo and thinking through how we might attack each of these competencies and what our action plan will be. Um, and see if you think that's a good place to start. Um, and then we can go from there in terms of covering next steps.
I'm going to jump right in, or is there that?
I think so.
First
I mean, I
agenda
think,
item.
yeah, I think that's our first agenda item, and I think it makes sense with this smaller group to sort of identify a process to determine which competencies we hope to measure in this curricular pathway, and then how we are going to identify those assessments.
Yeah, well, I mean, the way that made the most sense to me, and I think this is what they did in Utah is from what I understand from some of the materials I've seen, is starting with the competencies. And I think this group or the other groups kind of held back until the core competencies group had finished a draft so that we could think about it this way, to start with the competencies we've identified, and then think, like, in this pathway, how would we measure those competencies? And as I and that feels a little overwhelming, but I guess it sort of breaks it down a little bit. If you think about working competency by competency, like what would be needed. And I looked at the examples that were out there and really kind of had to remind myself. It's been a while since I think the only thing that was really an example the last time, when Mitchell Hammond looked at this, was the Oregon supervised practice pathway was pretty well developed. But looking at the other models that are out there, and Daniel Webster Scholars Program has been out there for quite a long time. But looking at the models that were out there, it seemed to me that there were 5 basic types of components in these programs. So that's why I created the chart with the different states showing how they had, like, how they were utilizing those 5 different kinds of things. One is coursework that you need to complete while in law school, and even the ones that are post law school pathways have some sort of coursework requirements. And I think that's to respond to concerns about breadth of coverage. And then some sort of supervised practice component, whether that happens in law school or after law school. Some of them also have, well, I guess all of them have some sort of portfolio, or something where you're demonstrating the work product that comes out of those supervised practice, whether they come as part of the law school or not. They all have some sort of reflective writing. I think Utah's the final survey might involve reflective writing. It might not. New Hampshire, I don't have anything in that column, but I'm certain there's reflective writing because so much of that program is law school classes. And then, some sort of performance in a simulation is in some of them and not others. And then there are other requirements, there are some sort of CLE type requirements in Utah, South Dakota. No, I mean, most requiring the MPRE as well. So, I just thought that might help organize our thinking about the types of things that we might put in our, might think about in terms of if we were building ways of measuring competence. And the other thing that I included was the ABA requirements for the law school curriculum, just because I think the people that are in law schools are pretty familiar with this, but other people may not be familiar with what's going to be required kind of all law schools. The 6 experiential credits, professional responsibility, the writing requirements, but really, like, in terms of the required coursework, like the ABA does not require law schools to offer coursework in any of these like core subject areas. So you can be an ABA accredited law school and theoretically like not have everyone required to take contracts, torts, crim law, and, these kind of basic. And most law schools by tradition have cover certain courses as part of their core required curriculum, but they're not always the same courses. And then there are courses that are required in many law schools, but not others, like evidence and some of the criminal procedure courses, and business associations often is not like one of those 1L required courses in law school. So thinking about any kind of required coursework would be going above and beyond what a law school would be required to offer as part of their program of legal education. So I don't know. That was the idea behind it. So I don't know how you want to how you think it would be easiest to proceed. And we also attached the Utah Appendix D is the not the Utah, the Oregon. It is sort of like something that you would do at the end of the process, which is align. Like once you've chosen what you want to make sure that you're aligning your assessments with the competencies.
Yeah, Carol, go ahead.
So actually, Oregon, we're doing it at the beginning. Oregon did it at the end. They created their program and then they said, oh, let's connect to the competencies. But it worked fine that way. The two additional thoughts I had as we talk about this. One is that I think it will be helpful and important if we talk about each of these. Well, for three things, actually. One, the competencies are, two are related. The competencies are still subject to massaging. And part of what I'm interested in hearing as we go through this from the clinician experiential educator side is what you think of as the competencies that are important. And if there's some modification of these or tweaking of them, or that I think that can be part of the conversation. These are not a cast in stone. We did them as a working document and everybody had an input, but this is particular input from those who are judging not competency for licensing directly, but in essence, competency to graduate and competency to get out of a particular course and what's viewed as competency on many of these skills. So I think hearing from you all how you view these and how you consider them as you are watching student performance, I think will be important. And the second is just overall, as we dive in, I think it will be important, for me at least. I know a bit about what goes on in our clinics at the University of Minnesota Law School, but not exactly what goes on in experiential work in the other schools. And even in our own, I don't really know the nuts and bolts of what students do, what they produce, what experiences they have. And I think knowing more about that is going to be critical in figuring out what that assessment might be, because we're not trying to change what's going on in the law schools. I think we're trying to tap into the competencies that are demonstrated in the experiential work, largely experiential work that students do. So it's not trying to make something up, it's trying to tap into what's already there. So understanding more about what you all do in those courses, what students do in those courses, will be important as we go through.
Yeah, and I don't have an answer to that, obviously, but I think those are, I do think there's a bit of a chicken and an egg situation, right? So do we say, you need to, as a law school, advise your students that are attempting this pathway toward certain experiences that will better align with these competencies as we have defined them? Or do we try to retrofit the competencies to what we're already offering? And I think that's a little bit more challenging, actually. I think, it might be easier to stay focused on sort of what is it that we think is the minimum competence that we need students to show, and then how many different ways might they demonstrate that, right? Because I think in one of these examples, it says something like I think it's working with clients or communicating with clients, and it's like in the circumstances as appropriate, right? So that can mean a lot of different things. And I like how broad that is, because I think depending on the experience the student is having, you could meet that requirement in a variety of ways. Steve, sorry, I didn't see your hand.
No, that's okay. Yeah, Carol's point um, raised a question in my mind, and maybe we've talked about this before, but you know, um, can we be sure, or how do we deal with the? I'm just thinking about it from a clinical perspective. Some of our clinics, and I think this is true of all law schools, emphasize certain skills, certain competencies, and don't others, right? And so we don't want to get in a position where I don't think students would have to take a particular clinic or subset of clinics, let's say, in order to satisfy that competency. So are we looking to make these competencies kind of as generic or general as possible, so that there are several ways that they can achieve them? And I think that's right. But does that still, and then would the idea be that then the students who enroll in this option are then told, here are the courses, here are the clinics, whatever it is, where you can achieve this competence?
I think that's how I envision it, but I think that's up to this group.
Yeah,
in some ways.
right,
I would also
right.
say that actually, in kind of stepping back and looking at each of these programs, I did notice, I kind of put it under observations, that they take sort of different global approaches, right? Like, I mean, I thought New Hampshire is very much, based in the law school. Like, we're going to create some courses for everybody to be a part of, and the focus is on completing those courses. In Oregon, it's all about the portfolio, and like you have to have a certain number of hours, but what you really need is the portfolio, which is then going to be assessed by someone else. In South Dakota, it looks like they really develop the placements, and they say, if you're in one of these placements for however many hours, like, you need to submit a portfolio of your work. You need to tell us if you have a court appearance, so that members of the bar can, can come and watch you if they want. And so it's very much focused on the placements. And then Utah, it looks very much like they don't have as much focus on the portfolio. They have much more focus on just the number of hours, like completing the number of hours. And so, and they have a lot more other little requirements to hit. But it's very, what I would call input focused. It's like, if you have these experiences, we're going to trust that you have learned what you need to learn. Whereas Oregon is very outcome focused and saying, show us your work. We don't care how you did that work, but show us the work, and we'll evaluate the work. We'll evaluate the output. So there are just different ways of putting the focus.
Yeah. Ben?
Yeah, I think I had a question that gets to that, in a comment Steve made. You maybe didn't use this term intentionally, but you said, for students who enroll in this option. But that just raised a fundamental question. Is this something that we expect students to self-select into from, the first year of law school, and then that would direct their course? Or is it something they could accumulate over time and then decide later in law school that they want to or not?
Yeah, if I could weigh in, I'm going to piggyback. I think I have a very similar question to what Ben has here also, in the sense that are students going to have to make, if I can use a parallel here, declare this like early on as a 1L or a 2L, or are there multiple ways, pathways into this? And I know we're also looking at stuff that's very, very new here, but I have a gut intuition, of which I can't prove. I can't prove on this one, is that I still think the default is going to be maybe taking the bar exam. And I would suspect that we might get some of the people who want to do the alternative pathways are those who have maybe failed the bar exam and now want to come up with an alternative way. Help me out, because Carol's shaking her head like she doesn't agree on this one.
So I think that this is going to happen before they ever take the bar exam, because they, and when I say this, I'm going to define that a little bit more. I say this is my, again, my vision or instinct about where to go on this, because we are creating what we want to see, right? I think that it, and as I've advised and talked with the Oregon folks as they're working on it, I think it would be a mistake to have it be the way it is in New Hampshire, where you have to enroll in it at a certain point. I think this should be open enough that if you can satisfy the requirements, and that, of course, we're going to create those requirements, but if it's about number of experiential credits, maybe number of client facing, I mean, we will create that, and a portfolio, which I think would probably be part of this. You can, I think a student should be able to say at any point, gee, I think I'm going to be doing enough of this that I can satisfy this, and start to put it together. At the same time, I think they're going to have to start thinking about it at the beginning of their second year to get in those requirements. I think there's got to be some, I envision that there's somebody at the law school who understands the requirements, whatever we create them to be, who helps students think through that process the way they want to make sure they get all their graduation requirements in place. So that's like, what do I need? Oh, okay, I'll need a clinic that satisfies. And again, I think these are very open-ended competencies the way they're described. And I think almost any clinic actually might satisfy these in different ways. And so it's about number of experiential credits. And if they start too late, they can't get there, but they're going to have to start thinking about it, because this is supposed to be done during law school, unless we want to create one that says, oh, if you don't quite finish the supervised practice hours, you can do that in your first year. That's a decision we would make. But I think we've been envisioning these sort of as two separate things. The other one, the supervised practice after. So I think the other one may be some people who fail the bar and decide they want to do supervised practice, but I don't think that's going to be all of it. But I think for this one, it's not people who failed the bar because it's too late. You can't start this after law school and get this all done. You have to have the supervisors of your supervised practice in the clinics, in externships, whatever we allow to be included. They're going to have to file something. They're going to have to attest to something. There's going to be supervision involved. So the supervisors have to know that they're supervising for this purpose when the students are in that class. So I absolutely don't see this one as somebody who failed the bar. I think some students may go on both tracks. Well, I don't know if I'm going to stay in Minnesota, so I may want to take the bar. I don't know if I'm going to get all this supervised practice in. I don't know if I'm going to get in the clinic that I want to, and whether I'm going to take the clinical path. So I will start doing this, but I'm also going to get on the list for taking the bar exam, and then decide later, or maybe even do both, as some students in New Hampshire do. So but definitely not those who failed the bar, because it'll be too late for them to start.
So follow up. So it's so as you're envisioning it, it's an alternative pathway for those who are in law school. Once we're not looking at then an alternative pathway for somebody who has already graduated from law school.
Right.
So
that's the other committee.
Okay. So what do we, just playing out my hypothetical here. So we have a student, I'm trying to think what his name was now. There's somebody who is in the Guinness Book of World Records for taking the bar 37 times and finally got past it. So I can't remember his name, but God bless him for doing it. But let's say somebody does fail the bar exam, already out of law school. What do we say to that person when he says, well, I'm not good at test taking. I'd like to do an alternative. We say, we don't have something set up for you.
No,
that's not our committee. That's the other.
The other committee.
They will be setting something up that might satisfy that, but that's their job, not our job.
Perfect. Okay, very good. Just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, and Kate, were you wrapped up, Carol, on that? Okay. Before I go to you, I just wanted to say, I think the instinct to take the bar exam just in case will be strong, right? And so figuring out the timeline for how we approve folks, because that troubles me. If we take longer than it takes to certify somebody who has taken and passed the bar exam, but I don't know what the right cadence is or what other states are thinking about in terms of when do they do this assessment, because you also don't want people who are doing real work, let's say in an externship or a residency in their final semester, cramming for the bar exam because they can't get an answer on whether or not they'll be licensed in the same sort of time frame that they could expect with the bar exam, right? So we're going to ask them to put a lot of faith in this program, that if we don't bake that into our system, I just think that's something to be really thoughtful about, in terms of what can we deliver. And maybe we do want to start with a smaller pilot group so that we can say, we will do our best to have outcomes measured by, I don't even know what's possible, but ideally the timely filing deadline for the July bar exam, for example, for students who have to make a choice. I mean, I just don't know how other states have handled that. And
Yeah.
as a practical matter, I think people will want to have some certainty in terms of what they'll be able to do post-graduation. So that's just something to be thinking about. Kate and then Emily.
I guess I defer to other people, but I would say that I kind of echo that. I'm not sure that this is something people could just in their last semester decide, now I'm going to gather together all the stuff I've done and put it into an application, because I do think that the response, answering Carol's point about what do we do in the clinics, the responsibilities that the supervising attorneys have, for example, in Oregon, in terms of attesting that, filling out forms and attesting that certain work was done by the students or I mean, the applicants, or observing a client interview and providing an assessment of the client interview, that would have to be, a student in a clinic would have to know that they're going to need to use that information. So they would have to, I think, sort of at least declare going into those experiences that they want to use this material later for this purpose.
Mhm. Yeah, Emily, go ahead.
Talking through, and I think that point you have is really valid as to kind of the time frame. And I'm wondering if, as this is developed, if it should be looking at it similar to how it has been in other jurisdictions, where there are some components like, if you're on the right trajectory. So you get feedback throughout the process, and there's different time periods, to consider all of those different things. One thing to keep in mind is that for the timely filing deadline, that's pretty early. And there
Right.
might be a lot more that an individual can do in that second semester of their 3L year.
Mhm.
But I think like somebody who knows that they have completed, say, 70% or 80% of the program is differently positioned than somebody who has only completed 15% of the program satisfactorily. And so kind of looking through it from that standpoint, I think is really important. And then the other piece that is probably important to consider is that, when we're looking at this as comparative to Oregon, and they're doing this as a lot of information that's happening after, matriculation. That's also the time period that somebody would want to be studying for the examination, though. So if we're looking at somebody is going to like graduate in May and then pull their whole examination portfolio together, I don't think it's going to work to have that information. But if you do have someone who has done it and kept track all along, but I think, to your point, that's something really important to consider as we're thinking through how this works.
Yeah. Well, and I just don't think it serves the student if they're testing as sort of like a just in case, right? That doesn't set anybody up for success. Yeah, Ben.
I agree with everything you guys both just said. It does seem to me like you almost would need to have the students declare at some point in the fall or something of their third year, whether they're going to take the bar, whether they're going to do this. Because if it does become viewed to students as, well, this is a way I can avoid taking the bar, and if it doesn't work out, I can always just take the bar, that creates a problem. I mean, a number of different problems, right? Or maybe it's you just can't take the July bar, you could take the February bar. And that would give students then the time that they would need to really prepare for it and not be trying to do two different things at once. But that might disincentivize some students from wanting to take this route. But I just, would want to be really careful about it not becoming viewed as a first shot at it for students, and then the bar is a backup, and then not giving it the full attention that it deserves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm not sure any of us know the exact right answer, but I think it's important to keep that sort of in front of us as we're thinking through how we're going to do this logistically speaking. Yeah, David.
Okay, two observations. One, we're talking about, I think, timing in terms of, getting results back to students. But I also want to say timing, and we're hitting at it here in terms of preparing. Over the years, I used to ask my 3L students, especially second semester, is there any advice you can give to 2L students? And they would say something to the effect of, take the amount of time that you think you need to gather your information for applying for admission to the bar and double it. And all of my students were saying that it's an incredibly time-consuming process to do it, especially for a lot of my students who have like maybe lived in multiple places. And all I'm getting at here is that I think we also have to be thinking about how much time putting together the portfolio compared to putting together normal bar application. And then the second thing here, and this is going to be incumbent upon the law schools. I mean, I will say right now, law school advising is mediocre at best. And I think this is going to require law schools to really ramp up their advising, to be able to be in a position of being able to say, let's say hypothetically it is sometime as a 2L or something like that. I actually think it's going to be no later than probably second semester 2L that students have to start thinking about this, in terms of maybe classes and so forth. So the law schools are going to have to be prepared to be able to provide the kind of advising that I don't see them doing right now. And that's not an impediment against it. It's just they're going to have to make that commitment.
Yeah. Tom, do you have a comment on that? I see Carol's hands up, but go ahead.
Following up on David's point about advising, and not to go back into the myths of history, but when I was in law school, the advising was not very great then, but there was enough advice being given that the dean, for example, would have a meeting with first years at the end of the second semester and would talk about courses they ought to take, even though they weren't mandatory. There was also an understanding that you would at least do either some kind of mock argument or mock program or a journal, and also there was a great emphasis on writing, and we were advised to hang on to our writing samples and so forth. So going back to those old days and not knowing what goes on today, I think this program can have a great beneficial value to all of the students as an articulation of what at least one source thinks are the benchmarks for being prepared to be to be a competent professional.
Mhm.
You should take this list of classes. You should take triad or something like it. You should, in a timely and contemporaneous way, preserve your work product. You should make sure that the work product includes an appellate brief, an office memo, and a motion to the court. Those sorts of things, because one, that's how you're going to be a competent professional. Two, you can have that in mind from the very beginning in the event you want to participate in this program. Three, as these programs are proliferating around the country, you'll want to have that background, credentials, and dossier or portfolio available, not just because you're looking for work, but also because you may want to move to Oregon or Washington or some state where that would be helpful. So I think having this type of articulation is going to be really helpful to everyone. And again, going back to where I started, if that's what the law schools are already telling the students or what they should be telling the students, it shouldn't be that much of a push to be able to be eligible in a timely way and not really run up in your sixth semester and thinking, oh, geez, I've got to recreate 3 years of work. Instead, I've got it because I've been compiling it all the way along for various purposes.
Yeah, Carol, and then Steve.
So a few things. One, I think now that we have, each school, I think, has directors of bars, academic and bar support, I think advising on some aspects and on the aspects most related to this are better than they used to be. And also the law schools have, now we have, lists of, you need so many experiential credits. Here are all the courses that satisfy it. You need so many writing credits. Here are the courses that satisfy it. This will be similar in terms of presenting that information. Here are the courses that will satisfy, but they don't satisfy on its own. So my other point, one other point, is that I think students will have to, the first time they take a course, an experiential course where they want to pull out a portfolio piece, or they want to do a supervised client encounter, they're going to have to declare, it's not enrolling in the program so much, but they have to declare that at that moment. I think as early as the beginning of their second year, they should be knowing that they should be thinking about which experiences are going to connect to this. And so starting the process, it will be impossible for them to come to the end of their sixth semester and say, oh, I'm going to put it all together. It's not going to be possible, I think, based on the supervision that's going to be required all along. I will say that Oregon, which is, as noted in Kate's chart, it's under development, but they're talking about a process where a certain number of portfolio entries must be made to the board in the second semester, by the end of the second semester of their second year. They don't have to pass muster, right? So they can replace ones that don't satisfy, but they have to start. I think the decision was not first semester of second year, because they may not have something at that point. Clinics that are year long, that prepare them at the beginning, and then they do the work in the second semester. But we could specify that some portfolio entries have to be made and submitted in the second semester of the second year, or at the end of that school year, which means they have to be thinking about it at least at that point and start the process. And then they can continue in third year. And if they do I can't remember how many portfolio entries they said would have to be done at that point, but we can develop that. But I think thinking about something like that, where you submit portfolio entries and then you get feedback, and then if you're on track, and if you are not doing well in that kind of work, then decide to do the bar exam. I mean, I absolutely agree. We don't want people trying to flurry and put this together while they're studying for the bar at the same time. So, but I think this will have to be a decision made pretty early to get going on this, whether it's something they carry through on or not. And the last thing I wanted to say was, even for somebody who picks this and then doesn't satisfy it, they're going to get so much benefit from the structured approach to doing experiential work during law school, and thinking about it, and doing cover sheets and describing what they're doing. The benefit will be enormous, even if they decide later they don't want to finish this, or they can't finish it, because they will have done thoughtful self-reflection, which is one of the primary things we want students to do as they become lawyers. So I think it'll be a benefit, even if somebody just starts on the track and decides they're not going to be able to finish it.
Yeah, I agree. Steve? And then I
Yeah,
want to go back to Kate just for a process check-in.
yeah, I actually was going to do a process check-in because we've got 25 minutes to go, and I feel like we're kind of on the back end of things in terms of thinking about who's going to be involved. Are we going to, how are students going to opt in? Is there going to be a pilot? That sort of thing. And also, even how do we satisfy the requirements through a portfolio or some other means? I think what we need to do first is, and this goes to Appendix A in what Kate circulated, which is the competencies, right? And how is each law school going to do it? I think my recommendation is that we work off of the competencies draft that has already been prepared for us. Yes, Carol's right, we can tweak it, but I don't think we should tweak it right now. I think we should just accept it because people worked hard on it. And so my question in our remaining 20 or 25 minutes is, how do we start going through Appendix A to figure out how do each of the law schools, how, if at all, not assuming that all of us do that, but anyway, how, if at all, each law school satisfies each of those competencies. And I don't think we can do that as in this group. I think that's inefficient, and it may be something that each of the law schools has to do and then report back to the whole. I'm not sure how to do that. Kate's shaking her head no. She's been down this, and I defer to her because she's been down this route. But what's the best way to first of all, do you agree that that's where we should begin, Kate, in terms of the process? And then what's the best way to identify how, whether those competencies can be met by each of the law schools?
Yeah, I don't think it's a law school by law school question. I think what we need to start with is very high level, right? So like not getting down into the weeds of what would actually be going on in the law schools, but to say, for example, the ability to conduct research in case law and statutory, constitutional, administrative, and secondary authority, including using technology and AI tools appropriately and ethically. What would we want to see in order to evaluate whether or not someone had done that? Would that be a piece of research in a portfolio? Like it just like as broad as that, right? The ability to reason and integrate factual information with legal document. Would that be a class, that someone had taken in legal writing? Would that be a portfolio piece? I think the third one, the understanding of threshold concepts and key subjects, and it's got a list of the subjects. I mean, I think every other pathway that we've looked at has a list of required classes. So I would just put in that blank, like list of required classes, and just do that kind of high level thinking. And then with that information, go through thinking in more detail, like, well, what would those classes be at the different law schools? Do the law schools all offer classes in those areas? And it's not, and are we just limiting it to the 3 law schools in this state? Or are we trying to think of this broadly enough that someone from another state could, or a law school from another state could apply? But I think if we're, but to just begin to think at a very high level, what would be the mechanism for measuring these different competencies?
Yeah, and so then going to the next one, the ability to communicate effectively with clients, lawyers, courts, and others. I think about a threshold question: would we accept an externship in addition to a clinic, right? So a clinic traditionally is, direct contact with a client. Well, not all clinics offer direct client contact, right? So, do we want to be that granular in terms of what kinds of experiences would qualify, or do we want to say any supervised legal work, could meet many of these criteria, right? And so I think that's, to your point, Kate, sort of what we have to decide as a group at the 10,000-foot level.
Yeah, and I think if we're thinking about a portfolio of work, I mean, would we object to that work being completed as part of a summer job? If the person who is supervising that could fill out, I mean, are we going to have these forms that the person supervising the work would fill out, and could someone, as part of a portfolio in their in a job between their 1L and 2L years, or between their 2L and 3L years, be able to complete a portfolio item, even if they weren't enrolled in that experience for law school credit?
Yeah. Carol, go ahead.
I would add to that 2 things. One, also things like moot court participation. Now, some things may be through a course, but that's not a clinic. So there's clinical courses, there's other experiential coursework, and the other, and then competitions where it may not even be part of a course. I think a critical piece in thinking about whether, because in some ways I could say for each one of these, well, yes, all of those might qualify. The question, but for some of these, there will be a work product that the bar examiners, that goes to the next 2 columns, law school responsibility or supervisor responsibility, because it might not be law schools, and BLE responsibility. Maybe there's a work product that is looked at by the bar examiners to see whether that qualifies as showing the ability to conduct research, for instance. And maybe the supervisor only has to say, this is their work, and as far as I know, the legal principles are right. And that's all that the supervisors are saying with respect to the written product in Oregon. Or are they going to have to say more than that on, say, fulfilling obligations to clients, using good judgment and conduct, are those things that will be attested by the supervisor, and how? Or are we saying just as long as there's not a checkbox that says didn't do those things, is that enough? And then the other thing for us to think about, and this is maybe a little bit too much in the weeds at this point, but thinking about who is doing it and how in terms of that supervision, are things like implicit bias, which we have to worry about, because the judgment of somebody who is not the bar examiner themselves, or even a law school faculty member where there's a little bit more control over it, to make sure that they're not judging someone by a cultural standard rather than a professionalism standard. So those are issues we should be thinking about. But the big point is, in some ways, I think we could take that list of the 5 categories, add into that Kate gave in the memo, add into it the possibility of summer or field placements, but then be thinking about, and then think about if they're all in each box on proposed assessment, is it a portfolio or is it an attestation by a supervisor? And then is that feasible for some of them? So it just complicates it a little bit, but I agree we should be looking at those categories of possible performances for each of those boxes and see what might go in that list.
Kate, were you going to say something just then? So I think
No, I think just staying at the high level at first, and then after we make a high level determination, then getting into the weeds one by one would be, I think if we try to get down into all the kinds of questions Carol's asking and all the down into the weeds, we're just gonna get mired.
Yep. I also heard you ask, maybe theoretically, but whether all of these competencies need to be addressed in the curriculum or in the curricular pathway, right? This idea about self-directed learning, or, I'm not sure, professional ethical obligations, if that's something that's tested in the MPRE and that's good enough, or we just are looking for red flags. And so I didn't know if it would be worth folks weighing in either in this meeting or in whatever shared document way that we move forward, to say, I don't think this is something that can be assessed in a curricular way, and we should just figure out a different way for the bar examiners to do that through character and fitness or something. I don't know if that was a question that you were thinking about, Kate, at this introductory level.
I mean, that chart that I had, like, it seems like a number of the pathways have things other than, I mean, like everyone has the MPRE. So like, are we still going to have the MPRE? I assume we would. I mean, I moved to Minnesota with like 20 plus years of law practice experience, and I had to take the MPRA because I just never had. So I mean, like we require that of out of state lawyers. I would assume that's gonna be a part of a pathway, and so we could say if there's one of these competencies that we think is like measured by the MPRE, it doesn't all have to happen in the curriculum. It has to happen in the pathway we create.
Emily, you have a response to that?
Yeah, just directly as it relates to that, it's in a completely different section of the rules, and it's just a requirement of everyone who seeks admission in Minnesota. And so I think that the Alternative Pathway Committee could certainly make a recommendation to the court on that, but historically it is not something that there has been any movement to shift. So yeah, where it's located, I would anticipate that it will stay.
Yeah, I would think so too. And I guess my only other point was just that, that may address this ethical dilemmas competency piece, that then we don't have to get hung up there if we decide that's plenty and it's already required, and we can spend our time in a different category if this feels strongly.
One thing that I would note is that is also something that is tested in the bar examination in the context of where it comes up. And so I think, like, you could look at it as sort of being something that is tested throughout a lot of the other competencies. And like you said, to the extent that it doesn't arise as an issue, that's sort of how you test it. And that's how they test it in the bar exam, is that if an ethical component weighs into some of the other things that come up in either the essays or the MPT, it's addressed that way, but not as a sort of separate standalone requirement.
Mhm.
And that is in the context of also having the MPRE.
Yeah, that's helpful. And it will be tested, I think, more broadly in the next gen bar exam as well. And so I think the other thing that's going to be helpful, just to put a bow on the academic advising piece, is that we're already going to be advising students differently on the next gen bar. And so this will actually dovetail probably better in some ways in terms of the skills that we want to make sure students are equipping themselves with as they prepare for that next kind of bar exam.
I just, and on a process point, you know, kind of what Steve was saying, like, how do we move this forward? I
Yeah.
mean, would it make sense, you know, because so it's 3:47, you know, and would it make sense to say, hey, look, people, like, why not, like, anyone can take a shot at sort of filling out the chart and, or providing ideas for some, like, and send it to me and I'll compile them for our next meeting, and it wouldn't have to be, you know, if you don't have an opinion about every single line, you don't have to fill everything out. But if you do have ideas for any of these, send them to me and I could just compile the ideas that I get and circulate that in advance of our next meeting. And it might help us talk more specifically line by line.
Yeah, I think
Would it
so.
be worth, maybe not as part of the chart, because the chart is sort of limited in terms of box size, but a document that basically reproduces that column and with a Google Doc where people can see what others have put in and add things, and so that it's not just everybody on their own thinking about it and sending it all to you, Kate, but that actually having a conversation through a document. We could do it filling in this chart, but I just think charts in a Google Doc could get a little bit crazy, but essentially the same thing with a space in a document, and then we don't have to reinvent the wheel if somebody's already written in something that makes sense, or maybe that sparks something else. So we have a conversation through the document, and then in real time when we meet again.
Yeah, I like that idea, especially because I like the use of comments in shared documents. So, you know, you could ask questions without mucking up the substance of the suggestions. What do you think about that, Kate? Building out something that folks can edit all together. So I think that will be more efficient, probably.
You mean instead of having it be a chart, just have it be a heading? And
Yeah, kind of like an
space
outline.
for people to write.
Yeah.
Space for people to write.
Yeah, with different buckets, right? Like, what are
right? But in a Google Doc where we can see what other people are doing.
Yeah.
So it's not just filling it in and then shipping all the documents to you.
And we could have a deadline, maybe not a deadline, but at least a guideline for when we'd like to get the initial set of comments prior to our next meeting, so that then we can have a set
plan.
of a plan and a set of comments that we can discuss without going to start at square one or anything. But we can
Steve,
move things forward.
Did you want to talk about the next meeting as part of this meeting, or?
Yeah, that's right. We have a meeting on meetings. Yes. We just wanted to get one meeting in. I think probably in the short amount of time we have, it's going to be difficult to figure out a set meeting time. I don't know if this time, I think it does not work for everybody, having had a couple of, private conversations since this one was set. And I wonder if we need to go back to Mackenzie and ask her to send another poll with the idea that this would be for the balance of the summer. In other words, when could people meet for an hour time slot throughout the summer, every 2 weeks, we would say. And then,
Could you remind us of our, like, working backwards from the deadlines that we have, the more global deadlines that we have for producing something that then goes to, like, rule drafting?
Yeah, the most important deadline, I think, there is that we'd want to get something to the full implementing committee by mid-August. Tom and Emily, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I recall, or Lynn. Yeah, because
we're shooting for the meeting of August 27th, so mid-August would be ideal.
Right.
So, and
yeah.
it might be a pipe dream, but I wonder, seeing how quickly an hour went by today,
Yep.
if 90 minutes, summer might be a little bit easier if we can find a time that, because classes are over and maybe schedules open up, although there's some things I know I do and other people have on their schedule, but 90 minutes gives a little bit more time, and maybe we can't all be there for the whole thing, and maybe that kills that idea. But an hour goes by really quickly when we have a lot of substantive discussion that we have to get through.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I know the Oregon meetings were 90 minutes. That's sort of my base mark, and they never had trouble filling those.
My thought, we could do it, but I always find that however long you set a meeting for, that's how long they take. One idea, especially because of the Google Docs, we might be able to resolve some things in writing separately, which would be great, and then we don't have to spend time or as much time talking about them in the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we stick with an hour at first? If it's not working out, Carol, we can try to expand it. But yeah, I think rather than trying to figure out a mutually acceptable time now, just talking about it, even though there are only 9 of us, but still, or 8 of us, sorry. We can ask Mackenzie to send out another poll and figure it out. I realize I may have confused her with the instructions, but figure out a way to do it so that people are committing to that particular time for most of the summer, realizing that with the vacations and all, not everybody's going to be able to make every single meeting for sure.
So we're aiming for the week after next for the next meeting.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we probably want to have this Google Doc up and then have people fill it out before the end of next week, and then have a meeting the following week.
Yeah, that sounds good. So Kate, would it be possible for you to put that together in the next, by the middle of this week?
Well, I think it's just
it's pretty much done, right?
It's just basically a list of the competencies with space to write after them, right? I mean,
right.
that's what how should this be measured?
And I do think, the sub points like the assessment and who assesses, like those boxes in the chart are helpful to have as separate discussion points underneath each piece.
Okay.
And maybe a threshold question, is this assessed in the curriculum, or is this a red flag kind of item? Or I don't know how we frame that up, but so that we don't get hung up on items if we agree it's not necessarily.
And those boxes are there, but I'm not sure that we need to work all that out in the, I feel like we're getting mired down. Like we need to have a starting place that's very simple, which is like, how do you think this could be best assessed? And just get some ideas at a very high level about that out there. And really, I would just go competency by competency and say, how do you think this can be best assessed? And then we can work out the details of who's doing it and what the timing is, and can it be in an employment or can it be in a clinic, and does it have to be in the next, I think all of that can come later as we drill down into each one. But I think a very high level, how should this be?
Is it possible with us on this call right now to set a meeting time the week of May 5th? So that we can at least have that meeting set, and then Mackenzie can work on a ongoing meeting time.
Let's try
We
it.
have we do have a meeting on the Monday, the 5th at this time of the Alternative Pathways Implementation Committee, which is the bigger, right? The whole committee.
Could we, just trying to look at this, could we meet before then? That sometime that day?
Specifically,
I could
at 1 p.m., like immediately before that, or
not so good for me. So
what about how about earlier? How about earlier that day, like 10 a.m.
It might be help.
Mackenzie, didn't we filled out a poll for that week, didn't we?
Yes, there was some responses. I can pull it up, but I don't think May 5th was a very popular
Mhm.
day from the
Yeah.
polling.
Okay.
And that's okay. I mean, Steve and I can get a report together for that larger committee based on where we're at that point.
Yeah, because we'll
What-
we'll certainly see the
Yeah.
Google Doc being filled in
Right.
by then.
What about Thursday, the 8th?
I'm going to be back in the UK that week, so morning time central is better, but you know, I can be flexible.
I'm
other
good
than-
all
yeah.
day.
9 a.m. on the 8th?
That
Awesome.
works for me. Yes, can make
Okay.
that work.
All right. Mackenzie, can you send that meeting reminder and then we can have a poll going for future meetings, but at least then we have a
Yeah, great.
concrete meeting point in a
Yes,
couple
I
weeks.
can set up the meeting.
Perfect. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Okay, I shouldn't be the impediment on this one. On the 8th, from 9:30 to 11:30, I have a commitment. If everybody else can meet, go ahead, but but otherwise, that's a time period that I'm committed.
Can you come for the first 30 minutes? Does that work, David?
At 9 o'clock,
Yeah.
20, I can probably do. I'm doing it. I'm leading an online training that starts at 9:30. I can
Okay.
probably
Could-
stay on for about 20 minutes, and then I have to shift gears to start the training.
I'd be willing to start it. I'm no longer a morning person for meetings, but I'd be willing to start at 8:30 if other people, and that would give David a little more time if that works for other people, but I don't know if it's too early.
That's easy for me. It's 2:30 in the afternoon, so.
Yeah,
can-
Steve,
I
if
can
you're
do
there,
8:30
I
too.
will likely be late if we start at 8:30, but that's fine. I mean,
Yeah, I'll be there. I can be there at the
we
beginning. Sure.
can take shifts. And I was gonna
Yep.
say, I can commit to you, David, that you can make all of your comments. You'll be first in line at 9 and make sure that we answer all of your questions. But I think it's good if we can keep some momentum going.
Yeah.
Lynn, if we split the difference, this is going to sound weird. 8:45. That way, I can come a little bit. I don't know how when you said
Even better. Let's do this. And Carol also wins. We'll do 8:45 to 10. So now we're at 75 minutes and everybody gets a little bit more time. We're flexible and it probably won't be 100% attendance to all these meetings anyway. And so, you know, we'll do our best to be flexible.
So any
Right.
chance that 9 a.m. on Thursdays works regularly?
It does most days except
Could
for
be.
the odd vacation days that
Yeah.
Steve mentioned.
That'd be pretty
Yeah.
good.
Or is
Yeah,
your
I'm-
commitment every week, David?
No, but I was going to say the week of the 18th of May, I'm out of the country teaching, and so
Yeah.
I'm just away the whole week. Okay.
I think that's going to happen for everybody at least 1 week,
Yeah.
but how about does 8:45 to 10? I'm going to stick with you, giving you your extra 15 minutes, Carol. Does 8:45 to 10 on every other Thursday work?
Yes.
It's a scheduling miracle. All right. And it's 4
Great.
o'clock on the dot. So we accomplished
8:45.
one thing.
Okay, good. Okay.
Lynn passes the mediation competency.
No, I don't know about that.
I
But
just I could just set up that
1, 2,
document, but then
1,
I'll
2.
send it to you, Mackenzie, to put into the shared drive, if that's okay. Or does our shared drive have a subfolder, or could it have a subfolder for this drafting committee?
I can make a
Mackenzie, can-
subfolder.
Thank you. That'd be great.
So, and I'll just mention, we've also then dodged a bullet of a big long day, but everybody in this group should know about it. There's a day and a half long experiential education conference at the University of
yeah.
Minnesota that intersects with what we're talking about here, and it's no registration fee. So if you don't know anything about it, it's maybe a good thing to connect to, and that could be the Thursday in between two other meetings of ours.
Nice. Yeah, I'm
It's the
signed up for
10th
that, Carol.
10th of July, yeah.
And,
Yeah,
and the only
cool.
other thing that I would mention is that the 19th of June is Juneteenth. And so we may want to look at moving that
Mhm.
date, but we could talk about that later in June.
Yeah, we may be meeting every other day by then. You know, who knows how much progress we are making at this point.
Okay.
That's an incentive to work hard and work
Yes.
fast. All right.
Awesome.
Thanks, everybody. I
Yeah.
appreciate it
Thanks, everybody.
so
Good to
much.
see y'all.